in the shadows. And the highlights have good texture because they are not blown out. So the range of the light from shadow to highlight is not beyond the capture of the image, and all the detail will be captured in your raw file. And you get a good emotional response when you have all that detail throughout the image for the viewer to look into those shadow areas and to put it all together. And in this case, this is in Berry College again, you see the animal, which I put in there. That's a composite. And then coming up and walking up the steps, leading you to the windmill and the building, but there's detail in the wall down in this area. Overall soft light is very peaceful. This is up in my Smoky Mountains workshop also. Easy to see into the shadows and the highlights with overall soft light. The soft light, very interesting. And that is often the type of light you get early morning, which is why we go out. The first time I was doing the workshop up there, not first time, but a few times doing my workshop up in the Smoky Mountains, and everybody gathers the night before. I rent this big cabin, and everyone gets a room of their own. There are 9 bedrooms. Every room has a double bed, private bath, and a jacuzzi. And so we gather there at night, and I say, okay, we're leaving at 6:30 tomorrow morning. What? Yes, because we want to get that soft light so that we get detail in the shadow areas and the highlights are not blown out, not losing detail in the highlight areas. And even on an image like this, the highlights are not blown out. So the range of light from the shadows, which is under his chin, to the background, and actually the dark area is here, is not that large of a range of light. So easy to see into the shadows, and it's easy to determine the exposure. So soft light, high key subject, high key. This is a magnolia I shot many years ago. And when I first came down to Atlanta, and I still am, just overwhelmed by the beauty of the magnolias. So I wanted to capture that. So I would take a bud off the magnolia tree the night before, put it in water, and the next morning as the sun comes up, it opens. So you get the fresh look at that magnolia. So I then would place it against a white background. So high key, meaning all bright lights, nothing pure black anywhere in the image, and it's low contrast, but you see the wonderful detail throughout the image with soft light. Soft light, even though there's dark subjects, but the light on them is very soft so that you see into the details. All the aspects of the shadows are there, the details of those. So even when you're shooting something that is not high key, if it's soft light, you can capture everything in a single exposure. Now, if you have hard light, very dramatic, high contrast, dark shadow areas, bright areas, the contrast range is very, very wide. This is out in the Great Sand Dunes out in Colorado that I photographed and telling the story. Some folks walking up through the sand, so it tells a story. Hard light, Horace P. Horse, phenomenal photographer if you look at some of his work. Hard light, striking, deep shadows. In fact, no detail in the pure black areas, but dynamic, dramatic, as long as you are using the highlight to emphasize the main element of the image. And what is so critical about this is you have the face, which is bright, but with detail, not blown out, and it's against the black area. That makes it 3-dimensional. And the hand, which is dark against light, 3-dimensional. So light against dark, dark against light, 3-dimensional aspects. Shadows may be pure black for the dramatic effect of it. In this image, the light from the above creates the shadow of the head down the back. So you have that leading line of the highlights coming up from the lower left of the image. That's why I first started to study this image, because so many aspects of composition are very strong. You come in from the left, we read left to right. Your eye comes into an image from the left, comes in from the left, goes up that, points right to the face. The face is highlighted against the black background. The hand, the neck brings you over to the other hand, the darkness against the highlight area. Shot this up in, no, I shot this in Costa Rica. Hard light, very low key subject, medium contrast, not high contrast. But the light was from above, from the front, light from above front, so that you see it's giving me that light on the face of the animal. And from the left brings a texture. When you have the light coming from the side, it creates that texture in the body and texture all over. So some light that's face on flattens texture, but light from the side creates texture. And I was moving around so that I could get the light area of the head against the darker leaves in the background. Oh, sorry. So you want to think of the direction of the light. Think about side light, because it creates texture. Light from within, which can be very interesting, and I'll show you one, but you have to think about, how do I capture all the detail? We'll talk about that. Front light, which can sometimes be flat. Backlight, which brings out ways of highlights around the sides and almost creates 3 dimensions. And the overhead light. Those are the types of light. So here we have an image, and here is side light, because it creates that roundness, which is called chiaroscuro, roundness. So highlight to a darker area creates the roundness, the 3 dimensionality, side light, roundness. Side light for this, I photographed this actually in Disney World. And the background goes black because the bird was so far away from anything, and the exposure, the highlight on the bird, allowed the background to go dark, but the side light creates all that texture in the body of the bird and the highlight of the head, and all that on the top of the head standing out 3 dimensional against the black background. Soft light, so that all aspects of the bird has detail. And it actually has side light again, which creates good texture throughout. So the exposure had to be there in the sense of having the soft light. If I was shooting this in bright sunlight, I would lose a lot of the texture. So I often look for soft light, either in shadow areas or in most cases, early morning, late evening, those types of times where the light is very soft. And I look for the direction of light. And if it's side light and soft light, I get great detail everywhere. So the side light on this allows those birds to stand out against the background very nicely and creates that texture. Now, sometimes it's just very wonderful side light coming in through a window, and it's pointing to the figure that's standing there. Actually, she was walking down through there, and so I was capturing her as she was getting down there, because I saw the light coming in from that window. But I also wanted to make sure that I had detail throughout the rest of the building. And so this was 2 shots, one for the building and the detail, and then her and the highlights, and I put those together with the direction of the light, creating 3 dimensionality. And you see the detail in her clothing. Even more so with this side light. And the light coming from behind in this case, which is lighting his face, and the face against the light background where the highlight is coming in and brings that bright highlight against the somewhat lighter background. And you see how it has highlighted his chin down in this area. So all that texture is in there. And then the way he was looking gave me the ability to emphasize that curve from you looking into his eyes and then down around to his mouth. And the highlights on the nose and the eyes had those stand out against. Now you see the eyes are standing out against the dark areas. And the highlight here is that much brighter again, even against the lighter area. I didn't want it to be pure black. I wanted his face to stand out. So I kept moving around so that the background had a little more light in it. Light from within. You're photographing inside a building. And it may be many sources of light, as there is here. The lights in the ceiling, lights from the side to light up. And it can be hard and soft light in the same setting. So I wanted to be sure that I could get all the detail of this barrel in the foreground and up in the sky. And even here, you see I did lose some detail up in the bricks of the ceiling. But overall, I have good detail, good depth of field. So light coming from within allowed me to capture this in a way rather than light just flashing onto the scene. And it created more of a three-dimension look to the image. Again, light from within, the cathedral, wide contrast range. And it's very, very necessary to have detail in the ceilings when you're photographing this type of architecture. So it requires high dynamic range shooting. So I'm shooting for the shadows, shooting for the midtones. I'm usually shooting in this situation somewhere around 4 to 5 shots because this is so dark up in this area and this is so bright down here at the altar. So the contrast range very high. And then in the window and getting that detail in there. And the only way to do this kind of image is with high dynamic range. Light from within, again, you have two very dramatic light. Now you have hard and or soft in both cases, and it can be a very narrow or wide contrast. Well, in this case, it's a very wide contrast because I have very bright area here above the altar and then a very dark area here. And the only way I could be sure to have detail in the entire image was to use HDR. Photograph something like this. This is down in Atlanta at the Botanical Garden. All that light's just a long exposure. And the only thing I did was to expose for that head and allow the rest of it to go shooting out and create a very interesting image. Now, backlight can be very difficult. So I have that very bright area in the top back there. And it creates lots of silhouettes. See those silhouettes? You see the silhouette of the fellow walking along in there. It casts long shadows. You have to think about how am I going to handle those long shadows that are coming out. And hard light, it can have very hard light throughout, very dark areas. So backlight can be very, very difficult unless you are doing HDR to capture all the detail in the shadow areas and in the highlights and then put the image together. So the contrast range from that bright area to those dark areas on the left and on the right, very wide range of light, more than could capture in a single exposure. So it's needed to do a number of exposures for the shadows, for the highlights, for the midtones, and so on, and then put it all together. And fortunately, in Photoshop, it's easy to put them together. Even outside, this is in Yosemite, and it's extreme range of light because of the bright area behind. The bright areas are behind, but I wanted to be sure I got all that shadow detail on the side of the trees. So looking at that, I needed to be sure that when I captured that detail in the highlight area, that I could be sure that didn't have that blown out, especially that little tree down on the bottom, having good detail there, and then good detail in the shadow areas, HDR. This is shot up in the Smoky Mountains inside one of the cabins. And and it's a very high range, high contrast range of light from the light coming in the door. So requires HDR, a number of shots, because I want a good detail over here in the left side and up in the ceiling and in the floor, but also to keep that detail out in the doorway and in the window, not blown out. So many times I'm judging a competition and an image like that is submitted and the light coming in from the window and the door just blown out. Doesn't make it a good image. So this one, remember, I want detail in the shadow areas. So by using HDR and the light coming from behind means though that foreground is going to be very dark. So I certainly need to have HDR. And so here is the finished image of that. And you can see I've captured all the detail, darken the bottom a little bit in the upper portion. And one of the things I do a lot in Photoshop is to darken the bottom of an image a little bit, darken a little bit on the top so that it brings the viewer's eye down into the main element of the image, if that's where you want them to go. So many times I see images submitted and the sky is so bright. Just darken the sky. Do a select sky and then darken it. But look at the detail everywhere by doing an HDR. And now your eye goes directly to that sunbeam, but you get to roam around in the rest of the image. Same here. There's the sun. This is up in Yosemite, but I was able to capture everything by doing an HDR and allowing the light to create those long shadows so that they could be leading lines into the image. And you notice the sky is a little darker up at the top to push the eye down and darker down on the bottom to push the eye into the center of the image. Very difficult here without HDR. So you have that very bright area, the sky, but I needed and wanted detail in all aspects of the image of that building and the little lady walking in through there. The light coming that way created the shadow coming down through here and a light on the side of the building. So it made this very dark. So I needed to do multiple exposures. Light from above. It truly separates the subject from the background, especially if you have something dark behind the background. But you see the highlight right at the top there, that bright area, that separates it. And it creates that single emphasis. And it's creating it as side light does, it's creating a roundness, but the light is coming from the top. But it's the same idea of creating a roundness to the object. Same here, the light coming in from above. When I was standing down in there, when I was standing down in there, that was so dark down in there. So I had to do multiple exposures. The same with this one, and I was inside and the light coming in, but I didn't want to lose the detail in that area in the top and the highlight coming down. Didn't want that to blow out detail against the wall, so an HDR. Light from above, very creative, separating the image from the background so that the light comes down the brightest area, but you see there's detail in that bright area, and the light coming down and putting some light on the book. And I was exposing only for the person and the book, and so that I could get the highlight and the detail. And this is a single shot because I wasn't worried at all about the background. The background going dark was exactly what I wanted it to do. Same with this one, with overhead light. And you see that's actually blown out on her head. I was accepting that in this case, but you see the highlight all along her nose and her mouth. And because I'm shooting where she is standing and there's some depth to the background and therefore comes out dark, she stands out three-dimensional. Look how three-dimensional her hand stands out against that dark area. Front light. In this case, for portraiture, you can see in the eyes, the light is coming from the upper, pretty much straight on to the face. And I'm getting good detail all throughout on the hands. So the exposure was such primarily to capture all the detail in the face and the skin. And the soft light allows the face to have smoothness throughout. And although I had some darker area here, I'm emphasizing the flow of her hand coming up to her face. And you notice that her hand is a little darker than the area of her face so that your eye doesn't go down there. Your eye comes in and your eye goes immediately to the face. Front light. So here we have front light, but here's even more front light. Really straight on front light, no hard shadows anywhere on the face. And notice that there are no deep shadows anywhere. Well, I say that, but here, some on the hair over here on the right, but on the face, there's no deep shadow throughout. The camera is above the eye level, which usually is most complimentary. If you're photographing someone, portraiture of, or whatever, the face, don't have the camera below eye level. It's not a good perspective for the shape of the face. Keep the camera either at eye level or a little bit above the eye level. In this case, it was above the eye level and very complimentary because you can't stop looking at her eyes. This was the bike race in Roswell. So even light uh, coming in easy. Uh, and what I wanted was to be able to capture all the detail throughout. And I was concentrating on how the bikers are coming in. And my mind is already saying, I'll do something to remove all that stuff in the background and bring you right into the main characters. But I want to be sure that I have good detail throughout. So bright front light allowed the very fast shutter speed to stop the action. You notice even these in the background are in sharp focus, so good depth of field as well as fast shutter speed. And then I took it into Photoshop and did an effect which brought more emphasis to the lead biker and a little less to the backgrounds. In fact, I started to blur them just a little bit. Come back here, but look at the difference. And I wanted to use this technique to remove all those buildings and things in the background so that you concentrate only on the bikers. A friend of mine, Gina Flanagan, photographed the eagle. Now, you read left to right, very interesting shot, great detail everywhere, but it doesn't read as well as if we flip it horizontally. Now you're coming in from the left and you're looking right into the face of the eagle. So very important of how you view an image. Now, all that background, flat, nothing of interest, let's just change the sky. And by doing that, look how much impact that image has. Brighten up the details under the head a little bit more. Let me go back to that. Go the other way. There's good detail everywhere in the image of the bird holding the fish. So now let's crop in and let's change that sky so that it brings your eye leading lines and the darker wing against the brighter clouds. You notice over in this area, it's a light wing, so you don't want them against that wing against white clouds. You just want it against the blue. But this wing here, which is very dark, still has detail, but have the clouds that I put in, white clouds, so that that creates the three-dimensional aspect of dark against light. Quality of color, the color itself is so important. Is it warm? Is it cool? Colors are more saturated. The more saturated, the more interesting the image. Shot this down from Jackson Street Bridge in Atlanta, late day, and you have long exposure so that you get those red taillights and headlights from the cars going along. But the darker area sky allows those buildings to stand out three-dimensional. How about warm? So here we have, go back to that one, we have warm and cool, but very strong colors. Here we have just warm overall and the dark against the light. And you see where the light is coming in allows that to be three-dimensional. So the dark on the right, as your eye comes in from the left, that darker one on the right keeps you from going off the right-hand side and then brings you back to the detail of the one standing on the left side. And the quality of color when it's very cool will tend to create a recessive look. Rather than more three-dimensional, it creates more of a recessive look. For example, I'll compare this back to the city scene, saturated, and that creates more three-dimensional look to it. And if we come up to the all very light snow, it tends to be recessive. This is up in Cartersville at the Capitol building. And I was so interested in capturing this. It was one of the few times that it snowed in Cartersville and had all the snow on the trees. So, and I didn't put the sky in. The sky was there, but I've darkened the upper left and the upper right so that it pushes your eye back down to the building. The top of the building is the brightest area, even though there's snow down here in the foreground. That's a little darker. So your eye goes instantly to the building. And the flag on the right keeps you from going off the right-hand side. So the structure of the image was very important. And I was standing there looking at the composition. That's how I determined how and where I would take the shot. Placing a yellow and blue object next to each other will produce a different feeling than placing blue and green elements. And so here I'll explain. Here you have the quality of light. So you'll have complementary colors. If you look at the color wheel, complementary colors are opposites. So the blue and the yellow are complementary colors. And you can see how very effective that is when you are using those complementary colors. And here, complementary colors, the blue and the yellow. Now you have analogous colors, meaning they are side by side on the color wheel. So you have the blue and the green, and that's very good to have them, but it doesn't create the three-dimensionality that the complementary colors. But just to understand how they are important to have analogous colors. Here's analogous colors of the blue and the purple, and the magenta rather, the blue and the magenta. And those are analogous colors and used very well on this image. And you see the blue and the magenta, and it gives you a very interesting image. So using complementary colors. Now, quality of color, monochromatic, a single color. Often we have an image with, in this case, the blue umbrella and the blue background. As long as one part of it is a little lighter than the other, that keeps your three-dimensionality. Color evokes mood all the time. You read through some of these reds: excitement, passion; blues, trust, reliability; yellow, warmth, cheer, happiness. So think about how and when you use color in your image, and when you're photographing either early day or late, and what the color does, not just that you're capturing it, but that it actually is creating a feeling. It evokes a mood. Greens are freshness, growth; oranges, playfulness. But yellow, always think about that: warmth, cheer, happiness; and blacks, sophisticated, elegant; white, of course, pureness and clean. The emotions that are generated by an individual color. So back to the city shot. Best made before the sun sets. Colors are saturated, and the colors complementary and create a certain feeling. The sunset at Glacier Point, Yosemite, the colors, and even on this image, as I look at it now, I should darken that upper portion of the sky. It's way too bright. Your eye is coming in and looking at this beauty here, and then this brightness brings you up here. I need to darken that upper area to push the eye back down here and allow this highlight to be the center of the interest and keeping you right into the image. This is built Misty Wilderness, and capturing all the detail in the shadows and the clouds. I was waiting for those clouds to move around. This is at sunset, waiting for the clouds to move around so that I would have this dark area against the light white area of the cloud, but not blown out, has detail. The upper portion of the image, I've darkened the blue a little bit. Even over here, this gold and complementary colors of this against the blue, detailed down in the shadow areas, and the flow of the image. You're coming in from the left, so your eye comes in. The sunset colors lead you right into the main portion, and then the sweep of the structure brings you up to that one peak up here, and the sky is pointing down into those. So think about those kinds of compositional aspects when you're out photographing. Same thing, Visti, and I wanted to and did move around so that those rock formations would have the light on the foreground here, darker on the top, and the color would bring you back from the left into the image, so complementary colors. Sunset at Mono Lake, California. Looking for those colors. There's that dark area at the top. So emotional response. The soft blue gives you a feeling of coolness, chill, a little more concentration and some colors, complementary colors in there, changes the feeling of the image, the emotional response to it. And if I created images, even more contrast and colors, beautiful saturated colors, your emotional response to this one, not that it's any, not that this one should not have a feeling of being a good image. It is a good image. It's just what response, emotional response, are you going to give based on how you present the image? An image. It's not the same image in this case. So it just wanted to give you the idea of how you feel by seeing different images, how much more you feel this one, and how you feel when you see one that high contrast and saturation of colors. Now, the quality of the light, always think about what's the direction and is the light hard or soft, the light itself. So seeing this situation, let me move something out of the way here a little bit. Oh, sorry. Where is the light coming from? The light is coming from behind the building and to the right. And you can see this little building down here has the side of the building lit really well. So I wanted to be careful that I would either, if I had to do an HDR, get good detail down in the shadow areas, great detail and texture in all the clouds in the sky, and that structure of the lighthouse standing up there, dominating the image, and with the colors working really well with each other. Very soft light. Here's another horse image. I've studied his work a lot because he uses light in such a special way. You think about this and think, oh, well, it's very contrasting. No, it isn't. It isn't. The bright area on the original is not blown out like it is on my slide here. Has good detail in the skin and on the side here. And the range of light, the darkest area is the shadow on her arm over here. And the range of that from that to this darker area down here, or even the highlight over here, is not many f-stops. So it's not a high contrast image. It's just presented as a high key image. Now you have something with light from within. And in that case, you need to really be working to keep detail in all the other areas because it's lighting up here, but nothing is lighting all these areas. Be some lights, but not as bright as what is in the interest there. And you need to do the HDR. This was in Yosemite. So it's somewhat side light and backlight. And one of the things I've noticed a lot with side light, of course, I've talked about it as a texture, but when you have light coming from the back of leaves on a tree, it just lights them up in a special way rather than having the light directly on the leaves. It really does a great job. And then in this case, I was careful to maneuver around so that the trunk of the tree was against the darker area across from on the river, and this tree on the right, the light areas against the dark areas, so that it creates the 3 dimensions. This one I got off the web. It's not mine. I just thought it was really interesting to something telling a story, telling a story. So I'll leave you with these ideas. If you take the letters ABC and you represent them with a number, here's something very interesting. Hard work adds up to 90. Knowledge, 96. So it's better to have a lot more knowledge and in addition to hard work, but knowledge, 96. Attitude, 100. Bullshit, 103. Oh, ass kissing is 118. So you look how far ass kissing will take you. It's 118. So I thank you for inviting me tonight and allowing me to show you my work. Thank you. There you go, Hylas. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Anybody got any more questions?
Looks like CJ's waving.
You're
Well,
muted,
you're
CJ.
muted, CJ.
You're muted, CJ.
Press your space bar. That'll get rid of that.
Okay,
There you go.
There you go.
John, do you use any in-camera HDR?
I have not, only because I started doing HDR long before that started to be part of the camera, but I think it's very useful and very good. And if that's something that's in the camera you have, use it. I also would say that I like having the separate shots rather than it be a single end shot so that I can work with those separate shots a little differently for each of the shots. So it depends on how much work you want to put into something, I guess.
The typical HDR requires a tripod. So much of us nowadays are so lazy, we don't have tripods.
No, you're right. You're right. In fact, I almost don't see anybody carrying a tripod anymore.
No,
So I want to take the single images in this and then just put them together.
but you don't use a tripod for that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I hold it very steady, hold it right against my head, just do things. So, and depending on the new whatever level of a camera you have, quality of camera, I'm amazed that I can have the shutter speeds going up to very high and still get very good image, and the quality of the raw file is superb on these newer cameras.